All right. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Gina Bastone. I'm one of the co-chairs of the library's Diversity Action Committee.
And I'm Loretta Wallace, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Diversity Action Committee. Okay, right. The University of Texas Library's Diversity Action Committee is an all-volunteer group of staff committed to diversity through inclusivity, education, and advocacy initiatives. We work to foster a culture that welcomes and respects all individuals and communities by valuing and consciously maintaining awareness of diverse perspectives and experiences. Our focus includes issues of race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, socioeconomic class, and national identity as it affects our staff, our workplace, our profession, and the communities we serve. Today's program focuses on systematic means of promoting equity for those who experience marginalization in academia and beyond. For the first hour of the event, we bring into the conversation two inspiring speakers to talk about the systems of support that help pave their way to success despite obstacles. Each speaker will present for about 15 to 20 minutes, followed by 15 minutes of panel-style Q&A, led by today's moderator. Attendees can ask a question using Slido, hashtag DAC for DAC, which will be visible throughout the slideshow. For the second hour, we will have student groups on hand to discuss their experiences providing activism, allyship, and community on campus. And those groups will be at the tables surrounding the room. So feel free to mingle and circulate about the room after our speaker portion to learn more about the support you will find at the UT libraries.
Thanks, Loretta. We just have a few thank yous. We'd like to thank our sponsors, Nadamu, the ice cream company that provided some free ice cream for today's event, as well as the UT Libraries for sponsoring this whole event. And I'd like to give a shout out to the event organizers who did a lot of work to put this on. So thanks to Elle Covington, Laura Tadena, Ileana Salinas, and Natalie Hill. All right, so I'm going to introduce our moderator, Mehraz Raman. Mehraz is a senior at the University of Texas at Austin, studying marketing and Plan 2 honors. She's from Austin, and she is the second Bangladeshi American woman to serve as UT's student body vice president. She's passionate about encouraging others to serve their communities, bringing awareness to mental health, promoting women's empowerment, and equity inclusion in all her work. All right, please welcome Mehraz.
Hi, everybody. I'm excited to be introducing the two speakers for today, as well as moderating the panel. I just wanted to give a few words first about why events like this are important to me. Today's theme is supporting equity through activism, allyship, and community. And equity and inclusion are things that have been very important to me throughout my entire life as a member of the Muslim community and a member of the Bangladeshi community right here in Austin. I've seen not only how equity and inclusion can really impact someone's experience in this city, but also at this university. My dad went here, and he's an immigrant from Bangladesh, so I've heard about how things have improved so much over the years, but also have seen so many of the things that can still improve. So I've seen that the playing field just isn't equal in a lot of ways, and I don't feel it's fair for people to be disadvantaged due to circumstances that they were born into and can't help. So I've tried to use my positions of privilege over the years to bolster the people who are born into circumstances that they can't help. And as a college student, I've noticed and taken a part in a lot of different inclusivity efforts. And my main point is that the core reason why we come to this university is to learn. And unless these efforts to be more diverse and inclusive extend to the places where we get our education, such as the classrooms that we are in and the libraries that we come and get our books, we can't truly get to that place of inclusion that we really need to be at. So that's why I'm here. And without further ado, I will introduce our first speaker, Angela Hall-Watkins. Angela Hall-Watkins is Executive Director of Provost Initiatives and Campuswide Priorities at the University of Texas, right here. She serves on the Vice President for Development's leadership team and engages key constituents to raise funds for student success and upward mobility. Prior to joining UT in 2018, Angela was Vice President for Institutional Advancement at Huston-Tillotson University, where she directed the university's fund development, alumni engagement, and communications programs. Angela spent 9 years at ACT, the leading college, or ACT, the leading college admissions testing company, where she launched a professional learning division that designed and delivered product training to more than 30,000 staff and customers annually. She previously served as managing director of the National Center for Educational Achievement, a K-12 educational research and advocacy organization. Angela's co-founder of Capacity to Grow, a nonprofit organization created to help K-12 school systems, leaders and teachers ensure the data and data processes necessary to make important decisions about student learning are present in all school systems. She's a former board member of Hospice Austin, Safe Place, Travis County Children's Advocacy Center, Trinity Episcopal School, and the current vice president of Welcome Table Incorporated, an organization that provides nutrition, healthcare, and educational services to low-income families in East Austin. A native of the San Francisco Bay Area, Angela received her BA in Human Biology from Stanford University and her MA in Education from the University of Michigan. Angela lives in Austin, Texas with her husband, S. Craig Watkins, who is also a professor at UT. Awesome. Welcome.
Good afternoon. It's pretty good, the volume? I can hear it. I was joking, Sebastian and I were joking as Mehraz was reading her iPhone. I'm like, I'm still so old school. I still use paper. So it's listening to the laundry list of things that I've done also makes me feel a little bit older than I feel like I actually am, but the paperwork clearly tells you how old I am. So we'll move on from that. Good afternoon. It's good to be here. I'm glad to see everybody. I want to thank the UT Libraries Diversity Action Committee for inviting me here. It's good to be here in front of you. And it's good to be able to speak about my story. This is one that I haven't told, most of which I'm going to say. Some things, if you've heard me speak previously, you might hear one or two things that I've said in the past, but preparing for it really gave me a new eye to some of my experiences and some of the things that help me be who I am. And as I looked up at the screen coming in and looking at the different systems of support, I thought, I'm sure 2 or 3 of those might have been available to me when I was in college. When I got to college, it was the late 80s. I think probably the systems, I shouldn't say 2 or 3, I'm sure the systems were there, but they weren't quite as accessible, I think, as they are now. And they certainly weren't as okay to step into. So just looking at the availability of the services, I think is pretty phenomenal. And I'm going to speak more in terms of the systems of support that I'm familiar with. So not so much these in a formal structure, but more in terms of what I've experienced and the types of informal systems that have supported me as I've come to this point. So I'll share my story, a little bit about the work I'm doing. I am executive director for the Provost Initiatives and Campuswide Priorities, which means pretty much anything that Mari McGinnis wants us to raise funds for, or what's a priority for her in terms of capital campaigns or fundraising. It's my job to make sure that all the resources are in place to make sure we do that fundraising. Right now, our focus is raising $1 billion for student support. What is, as you heard, my background has a lot to do with students and kids, K through 12 education. The heartstrings that are pulled for me is that I have the fortune of working with individuals who have the capacity to donate funds to scholarships or funds towards scholarships, stipends, activities that help us bring more students who can't afford an education at UT, help us bring them here, help make sure students have the activities and the experiential learning that help them leave the campus in a better place and continue to be upwardly mobile. So I'll talk more about that, but it's a work of lots of love as far as I'm concerned. I want to tell you first, just to give you a sense of my first system of support, a story. And this is a story about my grandmother. In college, I was assigned to write a paper about my grandparents. I chose my grandmothers. And as a child who grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area on the West Coast, was totally Valley girl at the time. I hope I don't say totally too often. I've been in Austin for 20 years, so I speak more like I think I'm not so much from California, though it slips out. But the history there is my grandmother and my grandfather migrated in the Great Migration from the South. My grandfather came from Shreveport, Louisiana. My grandmother came from a small town outside of Arkansas, Eudora, Arkansas. They were both in their teens. This is in their early 40s. They didn't migrate to the Midwest. They went to San Francisco. A number of folks went to Los Angeles and San Francisco. And in the paper I wrote, I had asked about my grandmother's upbringing and some stories about her. And one story stands out in particular. She talked about when she was still young, they would drive to and from the South, from San Francisco, from home. And they would take a couple of days preparing, frying the chicken, baking the bread, making the food, packing so that they didn't have to get out of the car very often. And generally the food lasted for a few days. I'd like to think that they got past Austin, Texas, or past Texas to the point where the food ran out. And at that point, as they're driving, they're looking for other black folks on the road or black folks in the area who they can stop and ask, where is there a place I can eat? Where can I go and get a meal? We don't have any more food. And generally, if there wasn't a family who they could stop and eat with, they would find out where that establishment was, generally owned by a white family or a group. They would go there for the meal. And generally, they would go to the back of the restaurant or to the home and knock on the door, say, we'd like to pay for dinner, pay for food. They close the door, and they just kind of wait for the person to come back out. And one instance my grandmother told me, which was not unusual, they came out with a bowl of stew. I'm like, okay. And she said the stew was, you might have had a piece of meat in there, had a couple of vegetables in there. But in one case, she said they clearly skimmed the top of that bowl, the grease off the top of that stew, and put that in their bowl and handed it to them. That was dinner. And again, the Valley girl in me says, you paid for that? How dare they, Graham? How could they do that? How can you pay for that? And she said, child, that's the way it was. That's what we did. We didn't argue about it. You took it, you paid for it. Because if you didn't, you were endangering yourself and you were endangering your family. That was a story that, it wasn't a new story to me, but at that point in my life in college, it had another kind of meaning to me. And it's a story that kind of implies how we grew up. We weren't activists by any means. Our community was our family. Our allies were our family. We were supported by the people who knew us, and that's who we really depended on. And in my high school where I grew up, my mom, a single parent mom, we grew up in we were raised or born in the city, but the education system wasn't great in the city, so she moved us out to the suburbs. And in the suburbs, in my high school, there were 1,200 students. I was one of 12 black students out of 1,200, so weren't many of us. And so my goal at that phase of my life was blending in. I didn't know that, but that's really what I was doing. The best I could was to blend in, to be like everyone else. And if you've got teenagers or adolescents, or you're not too far away from being a teenager or adolescent, you know you want to blend in. So I spent most of my childhood feeling like it was a compliment when somebody would say, you're just the perfect brown, Angie. When really what they were saying is, good thing you're not much darker. When we had families who would come over and talk and treat us like the people they knew from the areas they came from versus the way that my family or my close friends treated me, it was all kind of okay, this is not a supportive place for me, but my family was. So that when we talk about systems of support, for me and for what the rest of the things I say, that's really where it begins for me. I would say on that, another important comment, though, is because we grew up in the suburbs, when we would go to the city, to the hood where my dad lived, I did not fit in there as well. So that was not necessarily a supportive system. That was one where I talked white, I didn't act right, and so there were comments there that weren't quite what I was used to. But I had my family. They are what really gave me my foundation. They were the reprieve for me and really set me off in a good direction. So all of that to say, when college came around, I got accepted to Stanford University. I was the first, I'm not the first student, person who went to school in my family, but the first in 2 generations. Got enough scholarships, and this speaks to my work that I do now, to where we've cobbled enough money together to make it doable, to make up for the difference that the scholarships didn't pay for. And I left knowing that my education was the absolute ultimate thing I was responsible for doing. Anything else didn't really matter. The education was what was important. I had the fortune at Stanford University at that time to live in a dorm called Ujamaa. And I would like for you guys to say that word because it sounds a weird word, but can you say for me, Ujamaa? Ujamaa. Ujamaa, our definition of Ujamaa, it was extended family. And Ujamaa was a dorm at Stanford University, a rare occasion where it was the African-American theme house. So 50% or more of the students who lived in the dorm were African-American students. And again, this was in the late 80s. It was fascinating to be in a place of students who looked like me, for the most part thought like me. We all came from very similar environments where education was key, but we were also very supportive. And in a world where we were still examining and doing the kinds of things that we did in the lives where we came back home, we had a place to go back to that felt like home. And that was very much a system of support. A place where I could go, be free to learn more about myself, the culture, but also do so in a way that was inquisitive, not too judgmental, but also something that helped to keep me lifted. I would say that the other side of being in Ujamaa in 1988 was what was, at many campuses, a close look at courses called Western civilization or Western culture. And there was a phrase, and I'm going to wake you all up. What I would say when I came home was, hey, hey, ho, ho, Western culture has got to go. Hey, hey, ho, ho, Western culture has got to go. And my mother, if you remember what I'm saying about education, was very cool about that. Not cool like, hey, that's cool, but cool like very chilly. Like, that's not cool. And one specific comment I remember her saying was, I didn't raise a radical. I was like, you're not really with it, Mom. But it was a very different approach, I guess, to what I was getting at school versus what I had at home. And on one other side, you had the activism, the work against Western culture, and at the time, after we fought it, there were a number of debates about it on campus. There were marches on campus. Jesse Jackson came to campus. Robert Bennett was the Secretary of Education under President Reagan at the time. He debated President Kennedy at Stanford, and at the end of the day, they got rid of Western culture. That was huge to be a student coming from the blending in to a campus where we actually had a say and we actually had a role in getting rid of what we saw as an evil thing, Western culture. And it turned out they did, and I'm not, as you get older, we all find out, well, maybe it wasn't that evil. At the time, it felt evil. But the programs did change. They had more women focused in Western civilization, more people of color, less European influences, and more worldwide learnings and teachings were integrated into the classroom. So that was a positive thing. That was one side of Stanford. On the other side, I had a very traditional academic experience and very traditional experiences with faculty members. And one story I'll tell you, I went to my sophomore year, I had to major. I was declaring human biology, as you mentioned. And I did my research, looked at the professors, who's here on campus, who should be my advisor. I will not say the names, but I found one, gave him a call. And again, I'm from California. And I said, Professor X, I'd like for you to be my advisor. He says, Okay, well, let's talk about that. You bring the paperwork, we'll sign it, and we'll start looking at the courses you're going to take. And I got to the office at 2 o'clock. I remember the time of the appointment. I walk up to his office. His feet are on the desk. He's on the phone. And I just kind of knock on the door. And I got a little bit of a head nod, I think. I wasn't quite sure, but he continued talking. I stood there and I waited. At one point, he turned away from the chair and put his feet down, had his back to the door. And I'm standing in the door, being polite. Eventually, he hung up the phone. He turned around and he said, "Can I help you?" I said, "Yes, I'm Angela Hall. I'm here for the appointment about you being my advisor." He said, "Okay, well, come sit down." A couple of niceties. He pulled out a course book, starts flipping through the faculty area of the course book, and he says, "Well, are you related to Tom Hall over in engineering?" I was like, "No, I'm not." Says, "Well, you don't talk black." This is a faculty member. I said, "Okay." Well, he said, "Well, let's look through here and find out what other faculty members." Basically, he sent me on my way with a list of faculty members that he suggested I call. So that was the other extreme. When I went back to my dorm and told my friends about this, remember, I'm going back to Ujamaa, told my friends about it. Let's march, let's fight, let's do something about this. No, I don't want to do that. I didn't want to taint the education, the process, the work that had happened for me to get there. I certainly didn't want to disappoint my mom. And at that point, I realized I was not an activist. But I did realize that this was not right, this was wrong, and finding the types of support on the campus was important to me moving forward. And I've got a time, so I'll keep talking. But the idea was, as we moved on through the university, and as I moved into work, what I did realize was that I loved being with people. I loved talking. I'm a typical extrovert, get the energy from folks. And eventually found fundraising. It did not find me, or I should say, I did not find it. It found me. And one quote that came from living in Ujamaa that I wanted to speak to, because I think things happen for a reason. The word about Ujamaa, or the inherent part of Ujamaa, is the stress and obligation of the generosity that's important, especially for the poor and vulnerable. Ujamaa supports teachings, the meaning, and the meaning behind it is a support of teachings that promote the idea that generosity in itself is its own reward. And the idea behind Ujamaa is that it is influenced by all philosophies of the world. One quote, an Egyptian philosopher said, "Be generous as long as you live." This supports the thinking behind Ujamaa. "Be generous as long as you live. What goes into the storehouse should come out, for the bread is made to be shared." And for me, the bread is made to be shared is really what fuels my interest in fundraising. Doing the work that I do is really about helping others, help people identify their passions, how they can give back to individuals, and be donors in that. So the activism didn't quite get me the way that I thought it might. Certainly my mom wouldn't have let me get away with it. But the work in trying to support the people around me did, and that's what I thrive from. And I would encourage anyone here, if you don't find the systems of support that you're looking for, to do what you can to create them. Systems of support are dependent on seeking out and action. And to the extent that as we move from being in a home place to a community on a campus, things don't just come to us. I think as adults we start to learn that. As old people we start learning that. But as young people, knowing that stepping out of your comfort zone, stepping out and really seeking and getting the things that work for you might also work for others. I will say again, I'll repeat the quote, and as you move on in your life, if you will, do this. Make a difference. Make a difference by not keeping the bread, but sharing it. It's not meant to stay in the storehouse. And when you are with people who tend to step back when you're uncomfortable, I'd say step forward. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that, Angela. Next, we have Sebastian Colón-Otero. Sebastian is a diversity coordinator and licensed clinical social worker with the Counseling Mental Health Center here at UT, where he provides a variety of counseling services to UT students. He also serves as the CMHC Diversity Counseling and Outreach Specialist for Latinx students. and runs Latinx Voices, a campus support group for Latinx students, as well as Tea Time, a therapeutic group for trans and gender non-binary identified students. Sebastian identifies as a Boricua. Is it Boricua? Awesome. Latinx and mestizo, trans, queer, feminist, parent, man of color, anti-colonial and anti-oppression activist, and healing practitioner. In his multiple roles, he seeks to provide services and care centered in self-determination, compassion, liberation, and healing. He believes that all struggles for liberation are linked and that it is our duty and our ultimate act of love to engage in the development of support systems for ourselves and others, working together toward a better, more inclusive, and equitable world for all. Sebastian has over 10 years of experience as a mental health professional and over 20 years of experience as a community organizer, activist, and advocate. He continues to be active at national and regional levels, as well as in Puerto Rico, where last year he created an initiative providing direct economic support to queer and trans people affected by Hurricane Maria. A native of Puerto Rico, Sebastian received his BA in Natural Sciences from the University of Puerto Rico, where he also took graduate coursework in sociology. Sebastian moved to Austin in 2002 and worked as a community organizer and sexuality educator for various organizations before moving to Ann Arbor, where he received his Master's of Social Work from the University of Michigan. In 2015, Sebastian returned to Austin and began his work with the CMHC. Welcome.
This is where I need support. Talk about support systems. Being in front of a podium and microphone is... Can you hear me all? I can be loud. Do I need the microphone? Yeah? No? I'm going to move this. Hi, everybody. Sebastián, Boricua means Puerto Rican, if you don't know that. That's what she was talking about. I'm Boricua. I'm Puerto Rican. From the island, now we talk more about an archipelago, meaning that it's a community of islands. My name is Sebastián. I'm a therapist here at the Counseling Center, and I'm deeply honored to be here. My pronouns are he and him, and I don't have much in writing prepared for you, but I feel inspired. I feel humbled to be here, and I feel actually pretty impressed that I was having all these thoughts about support systems, and I kept thinking about non-official, non-traditional. I couldn't think about structures and services and all this stuff. And what kept coming to me was my experiences of experiencing support or both internal, external sense of support. So when you shared, I was like, oh, okay, I'm okay. I'm on the right track in some way. A little bit of me. 20 years as an activist, maybe more. So I'm going to be 50 this summer. I'm very proud of that. 50 years old. I have 2 kids. I've been married for about 15 years. I think that's important also to share. Sometimes I avoid sharing that because I try to be careful about sharing my heterosexist benefit. Even though I'm a trans man, I am in what is perceived as a straight relationship with 2 kids, and I get the benefits of belonging to a nuclear family. But I just had a 4-month baby, and last night I didn't sleep much. So I need to do some disclaimers. Baby was crying a lot. And I'm feeling really moved by in some way or being here willingly, to talk about support systems, and I try to bring in the energy of my ancestors, the spirits. When I do this kind of talk, I consider myself a very spiritual person, and as I was trying to evoke that, I felt really sad. I felt a sense of grief. I also felt really moved and compelled to name that before I tell you this thing about my support systems, that I'm feeling very aware that we're talking about support systems and our intention of creating equity through activism, allyship, and community during a time where my perception, and this is personal, my perception is that a lot of support systems that historically we have taken pride to put out for people are being questioned or taken down or There is a general sense of evoking more than sharing the bread, saving my bread, even if it gets moldy in my pocket, because I don't, I feel threatened to share the bread. That's a little bit of the sense that I feel socially and politically, and I want to make that disclaimer. That's where I stand as a trans man of color. I feel that we're living difficult times, and I feel that it's beyond politics. It's about a sense of questioning our principles, our morals, our ethics as humans, and how we relate to each other. So when I think about systems of support, I think about it not in the traditional way of offices, services, and structures, because for me, growing up as a son of a single mother in Cayey, Puerto Rico, colonized, most of those structures were not made for me. So those were not the places where I would get support. Those kind of, the counseling office at my school was not the place I would go and get counseling. I would probably run away from it because it would tell me that I was wrong. It would tell me that I was crazy. It would tell me that I was to be put in place. Traditional systems of support in some ways have been threatening to my life. So I want to be careful when we talk about that. For me, that doesn't mean that we need to erase them, but I want to be careful that we don't idealize whatever we put out as systems of support, and we constantly question who are we serving and how do we continue the talk today about equity and inclusion in those systems. So when I thought about systems of support from a counseling perspective, I was thinking, for me, I have this kind of like ecological approach to the idea of support. I believe that I'm an organism in a system, and that my support systems include outside support, structured support, people, system services, but also an ecosystem. So when I think about systems of support, I'm also thinking about those fabulous rosemary bushes that we have around campus that are life-saving for me when I'm walking out of a space that may feel really threatening to me, and I stop to talk to the rosemary and smell the rosemary, and it gives me a sense of, I belong in the earth. It's okay to be here. Let me take a deep breath. My grandma taught me that plants, animals, trees, the earth are an important support system, are part of what organizes my breath, organizes my internal organs back to place and says, okay, you're okay, you belong here. So that's the perspective I have of support systems. And when I think about my journey, my experience with support, last night I was really struggling to not feeling able to write something for you. I've been struggling a lot with standing here and talking about support. And that's when I realized that this political moment, this historical moment feels very shaky for me. And I kept going back not only to that ecosystem approach, but also to a notion, thank you, that you brought up, a notion of values, a notion of sharing the bread, a notion of, when I look at the title of this presentation, what it evokes for me is a sense of, if we were going to build, if we continue to strive, if I try to live my life embodying allyship, community, activism, and support, it has to be grounded in a sense of human connection to each other, in seeing each other, in noticing each other's humanity, in being able to slow down and forgive and love each other. So then we can build those systems in a way that it's not based on cold, pretentious ideas of right and wrong, but in a basic notion of, I respect your humanity and you respect my humanity, even if you don't understand it. So I was sitting in bed, and instead of grabbing a paper, I grabbed my phone. And this is what came up for me when I went to a tender place in my chest, and I was like, what comes up for you, Sebastian, what you want to tell these folks? They're here paying attention. What would you want to tell them about support systems? And this is what came up. Forgive me, I'm going to be all over the place here. It says, When I think of support systems, I think of my third grade teacher who talked about the magic of books and reading, and like little she knew that she was introducing me to one of the most important coping tools of my life, the power of books, knowing, and imagining. Support systems is my grandmother's hands folding tobacco leaves and teaching me how to count peas on the kitchen table, introducing me to the value of manual labor. Support systems is my math teacher telling us that math is for everyone, and everyone can do it if we practice, becoming one of my first lessons in equal access to education and knowledge. Support system was Medicaid in the 70s, providing me and my brother access to medical care because we were poor, and all we needed to do in my hometown was show up to that dirty clinic and get seen by a doctor, walk out with the medicine, and that was it. Support system was the food stamps. It allowed us to buy milk, cheese, and those crackers my mama loved. We would wait for the food stamps just so she could get those crackers. It was my neighbor's phone. We didn't have a phone at home. So we would go to the neighbor to call my aunt or my grandma to check on them or say hi or ask for something we needed or check if they needed something. And we did not have a phone, but that phone in the neighbor's house never felt like it wasn't ours. Support was the bodega owner. It was a little store down the street. I would go to him and say, Mama says to send her half a bar of butter, a little bit of bread, and some ham. And he would put it all in a little bag, grab a pencil from his ears, write it in a notebook, and say, all right. And he would write it in that notebook so she would pay one day. Support system was my mama working on a sweatshop. Even with pneumonia, I have memories that she never had sick leave. She never had sick days. And I have memories of my mom once had a really bad pneumonia. She was coughing pieces of material because she worked on a sweatshop and she was breathing that all the time. So as she was spitting out these pieces of material, I was feeling like, wow, you shouldn't have to go to work. And my mama said, you go to school, that's your job. I go to the sweatshop. You go to school so you never have to. Support system was the full moon. As a kid, when I was desperate, I didn't know what to do, I would lay down in the grass, look at the sky, and look at the moon and talk to it. I would talk to the moon for hours. I would ask the stars for answers. Looking at the universe in my hometown will remind me that the world is gigantic, that whatever shit was happening was too small for me to surrender, that for some reason I have the magic of the stars and all I had to do was breathe. The moon was my support system. Support system was my first bike, allowing me to ride away or in circles, shaking off the stock energy of anxiety and fear, switching it for fun, adventure, and I can jump that mount. My bike meant a lot for me. Support system was salsa and merengue music. I was very shy as a child. I was socially anxious. As a trans kid, I always felt outside of place. And then as a grown-up, I started dancing. And salsa and merengue gave me a connection to my body. It allowed me to feel in place with my hips, which I had hated for a long time. Now dancing salsa and merengue feels so good, and I still do it. There is actually evidence, there is research-based evidence that bilateral tapping and bilateral movement is healing for trauma. So my inner child knew that shit because I started doing salsa dancing and merengue, and I discovered that my hips are sexy and beautiful. So support systems is salsa and merengue. Support system was my best friend's mother, who would make a toast for her and a toast for me. She knew I didn't have breakfast, but she never asked me if I was hungry. I would just show up to pick up my friend to walk to school, and she would put down 2 coffees and 2 toast. She never asked me, do you want one? She just fed me. She protected me from the shame of saying if I was hungry or the shame of having to ask. Support system was the afternoons in the beach in San Juan, looking at the ocean for hours at a time. I learned meditation from the ocean waves. They showed me the rhythm of my breath. Nobody told me about it. But I would go there after working in a community-based organization and dealing with the death of many of my friends during the AIDS crisis in the 90s. Support systems was activism and my first Pride March in San Juan. Walking down the street with a group of queers, feeling super scared, hearing all those strangers who stood in the side of the street to tell us that we should die, and seeing the other strangers, the beautiful allies who showed up to say, "You go for it, you are beautiful." Support system is a poem that makes me cry and reminds me of my relevance. Support system was the available financial aid at the time when I went to my first year of college, because otherwise I wouldn't have even dreamed about going. So getting a letter that said that I qualify for financial aid for that first year is the only thing that allowed my mama to say, maybe you can go. Support system was my feminist professor giving me language for what I already knew, encouraging me to keep going, to not give up in college. Support system was a librarian. Librarians in the house, librarians in the house. Support system was a librarian. In my first year of college, when my mom kicked me out of the house for finding me with another girl, because at the time I identified as a lesbian, that librarian took me to her home. She asked her oldest son to step out of his room because we were going to sleep there. She gave us place to sleep for 3 weeks. She could have lost her job. She made us food and said, "You will not sleep in the streets as far as I have a house." That librarian saved my life. She's still alive. Aixa Leon is her name. She was the librarian running the feminist little library at my hometown college. I remember her voice telling us, never be ashamed of being yourself and loving each other. She introduced us to some kind of French poetry that I still don't remember, but it sounded beautiful. Support system were the trans women and drag queens living their life without apologies in Puerto Rico, while I was terrified that if I come out as trans, I'm going to get killed. Just knowing that they will walk down the street and be themselves gave me the power to stay alive. They saved my life. Support systems, people, for me, is memories, is songs, is food, is music, is a drum from Puerto Rico reminding me of my inner rhythm. It's rice and beans, is the ocean, but it's also that stranger that watched over me while as a homeless youth I was sleeping in a bench in San Juan. And he said, "You look tired. Sleep, I'll watch over you." I trusted him. He didn't do anything bad to me. That was a miracle, but I trust that. Support system was my friend who said, "Hey, what are you up to?" I said, "I've been out of college for 2 years and I don't know what to do with my life." She said, "Hey, I'm applying to graduate school. Will you want to?" I said, "I hate applications." She said, "I'll do it for you." It was the last day. She did it. I got in. I showed up. Support system was the den of students at University in Michigan, who when I called him, I said, "Hey, I was accepted. I'm calling because I'm terrified. I'm a trans man of color and I want to know what's there for me." And he said, "I can assure you that you won't be hurt. I don't know what to tell you in terms of what I can do for you around protection. But I can tell you that I'll do my best, and I will try to create a space for you to be at least secure enough to finish your program. I'll be here for you." Support system, people, is my mother saying, when I came to her, I changed my name, I got my surgery, I said, "Mama, will you ever understand that I'm a man, I'm trans?" And my mama crying hugged me and said, "No, I will never understand. I grew up without books. I don't understand any of that. I don't know what gender is. I don't know what you're talking about. I think there is a part of my heart that's always going to miss you as my girl. I gave birth to you. I named you. I'm scared of losing you. I don't understand, but I love you. And I don't need to understand you to love you." Support system is you all. Sitting here exploring your own internal sense of who are you and how do you support other people. We are the support systems, people. That's why we're here, because we can be here for each other.
Thank you both very much. I really enjoyed getting to hear your stories and your connection to different support systems. So now we will be transitioning to the Q&A portion of the event, and I will be moderating the panel. I have a few questions already from different student groups, and then we will have other questions after these as well. So first question, finding mentors who share your identity can be really helpful for LGBTQIA plus students, but it can be awkward to figure out who in the faculty or administration is queer. So how can students connect with queer mentors?
You know, as a queer person myself, I think it's a tricky question in terms of both asking staff or faculty to be visible, when sometimes that takes the risk of losing your job or losing actually the power that you may have to protect others. But on the other hand, I'm myself visible. I'm myself out there. It is awkward. I think from a counseling perspective, something that constantly comes to my mind is talking to other people may surprise you. Checking with other people may surprise you, and checking your assumptions may surprise you. I think when we think from a trauma perspective, from a trauma-informed perspective, one of the things that trauma does to us is that it creates a hyper-awareness and hyper-vigilance that's very valid, where we don't trust anybody. For communities of color, for queer people, that means that if we see, especially if the person looks like the people that traditionally have attacked us. So as a trans person, I meet cis people, I'm ready to fight back or scared that they're gonna hurt me. As a person of color, I can be very scared of white people in power. And that's part of what trauma has done, and it's also a very healthy defense mechanism to survive. But one thing I always encourage from a trauma-informed perspective is to check in when we're feeling that defense, to also check in and take a moment to do a little bit of a reality check. Because for me, for example, that white person may become 2 minutes later my best ally. For me as a queer person, I may be making an assumption of somebody being anti-queer just to realize later that they're not. To realize later that actually that was potentially my best ally. So I think it is important to check our assumptions both as allies and also as people seeking that support, and to consistently, as far of our capacity, say what we need, ask for what we need. Sometimes we can't, and if we can, then acknowledge, ouch, I can't. I'm in a place where I can. What else can I do? Can I ask a friend to help me? Can I ask somebody that feels safer to help me? But for me, it's been crucial to check my assumptions, because then is when I have found mentorship in people that otherwise would have been strangers. That's how I have found support in people that otherwise I would have thought they were my enemy. So I think it's very important to give it a try, to check our assumptions.
Do you mind? This is on. Do you mind repeating the question? There's one piece to it.
Yes, of course. So finding mentors who share your identity can be really helpful for LGBTQIA plus students, but it can be awkward to figure out who in the faculty or administration is queer. So how can students connect with queer mentors?
So the first thing that came to mind was, as an African American, I'm out there. You know it when you see me, as opposed to other individuals, people who identify in other ways. It may or may not be something that's quite obvious, and so I wanted to be able to answer in a meaningful way, and I think for me, in terms of finding mentors, color has always been an important piece, but it hasn't been the only piece. And I think as I've gotten older, I've learned, it's just from experience, there's some things that I'm looking for that I'm going to get from folks who look like myself, and there's things that I'm going to get from folks who don't necessarily. And I can say I'm the mentor for a number of women. I think for me, it tends to be more women. It's more gender focused for me than it is my ethnicity, my race. So, you know, I think it changes over time as we get older. I would have answered the question completely different. As my time at my dorm, I would have said, it's all about the black people. It would have been all about, you know, this, I guess just more rigid thinking about the box that I was fitting in and the things that I needed. And it's nice as you get older, you become like a fine wine. You start to just kind of mellow out, and you recognize there are more things to life than what we see as black and white. And I don't, pun intended or not intended. So I think really just to your point, not making assumptions, really taking a check on what is it that you're looking for and being very honest about that. And then identifying that and people you trust, obviously, finding that in the people around you.
The other thing I would add is like, one of my mentors right now, as we talk, is Gloria Ansaldúa. She died, but my mentor is still there. So sometimes also expanding the notion of where do I can find mentorship. I didn't have many mentors that I could feel like were fulfilling my needs, but I figured out what is my need, and then I was able to find mentors in different places, including people that I never met, but they're my mentors because symbolically I hold them as guidance. So to expand also the notion of where are my resources that I can go to. And in terms of academia, I think it's very important to also just name it and say what do I need. And if I'm a person of color and I want a mentor that is doing work on this area, or sometimes our need may not be around our identity. So to also be open to check with yourself, like, for example, I grew up without a father. And in therapy, it took me many years to realize that part of the mentorship that I seek and need is father figures. It's kind of outside of what I was suspecting 20 years ago. But now I look for that, and I reach and ask.
Yeah, that's interesting that you said that, because that made me realize that nowadays a lot of the mentors for young people are celebrities and things like that, because we really feel like we know them with all the information that is all on their social medias and everything. So it's very important to think about that. Thank you. So next question, how can instructors and TAs better support their students outside of providing them with a list of resources in the course syllabi? Are there any standout examples of TAs or instructors building inclusive support systems for their students that y'all can think of?
I probably can speak to them as well as Sebastian can on campus. I can think of my own experiences. The ones who made the biggest impact on me are the ones who I interacted with outside of the classroom, outside of that space where I was just one of many. And whether it was dinners, at their home with other students, or coffee, it was more the opportunities to get to know them. In some cases, babysitting their their children, that made a difference. Seeing their homes, seeing how they lived was very different than the homes and the places I grew up in. So just an exposure beyond the classroom for me was an example of something that was very informative, educational. But in terms of what's going on campus, I don't speak as much with the TAs or the professors to hear about what they're doing.
Well, at first, I agree with that. I think the interpersonal relation can be super meaningful, and just getting to know each other as people. When I think about practices, what was the question again?
So providing resources just outside of a course syllabi.
Yeah, and I'm thinking that question maybe in the realm of being more inclusive, providing support. I think there is a lot of TAs here at UT who actually go above and beyond. I mean, they do develop a strong relationship with their students, and I have worked with several TAs who are going into, for example, very, very concrete example, asking students to always identify themselves with name and pronouns. It's a very, very specific practice of inclusion. Checking in on their own assumptions about students' races, or when they're discussing. In these times, there's a lot of discussions in classes that may evoke a lot of emotional reaction for students, and doing disclaimers and making sure they're checking on the emotional sense of the room. I think TAs who are holding up their voice as allies by, on the first day of class, saying, I'm here to support you, and these are the specific ways that I want to. I support all students in all their diversity. It's a phrase that just by saying that tells the students, oh, I can go to you. I support all students in all their diversity. I think there is a lot of TAs also holding their identities on the sleeve and being models for other people. I also want to say that I also see TAs who are struggling emotionally and going through the same struggles, the same difficulties, the same lack of resources that other students. So they have a double duty of doing their own journey of being a student and then providing support. So I think it's important that they seek their own support systems. Yeah, I have a whole bunch of practices that TAs are doing, including, for example, questioning. There's another example that come into my mind. Questioning how classroom participation is structured and making sure that quiet voices have a space, making sure that different ways of learning are manifested, checking in with students where students, if a student is lacking and not presenting, they may say, what's going on for you? So can we do something else?
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so what do you think is the most beneficial thing that students can do to ensure their own academic success?
You want the answer as a parent? I've got different answers, or as the answer I would have had as a student. I have a freshman who's in college, a daughter who's a freshman in college right now. And say again, one more time, what students should do to own academic success. Okay, as the parent, I say go to bed, get a good amount of sleep, eat your meals, but really the thing I think that really sticks with her right now, and particularly as she's looking and finding her new tribe. She came from an environment, she's the only child. Her father is a professor. Her mom has been in fundraising and education all her life. So she's been in a bubble in a lot of sense of support. She also is a pleaser. She really wants to please those around her. So when we're not there to kind of boost her up and be there to say, you know what, it's okay to say no to your friend who wants to do these things. It's been a transition. So the advice I've said to her is choose those who would choose you. Choose those who choose you. Simple, but when you're trying to run after the popular kids, when you've got a group of students over here who love you already and they want to do things for you, but you want to be chasing after these other things, do and be the person who you are and find those who support you. I think that is the foundation that threads everything, whether it's academic support, your social life, your health and your wellness. Finding those who can support you for who you are is critical. I think from there, then you might get enough sleep to study and do all the things, get all the good grades.
Yeah, no, that ditto. It's finding those who respect you, who support you, who will be there for you. I agree with that. I'm thinking also, thank you for that, because I think sometimes we make it very complicated. Very, very complicated. And you need to have this and that laptop and those sneakers and do yoga, run every morning, do meditation, and then you get too tired. So I appreciate that answer. I'm reflecting in my work with students of color, with queer students, with immigrant students, with undocumented and documented students, thinking particularly about students who, to ensure their academic success. What comes to my mind is, if you don't remember, I want to remind you that you deserve to be here. To hold on to that strong sense of deserving and belonging. And for example, I work with trans students who sometimes feel like I'm the only one in my intersectional identities. I work, if a person has a disability, is trans, is queer, belongs to maybe a traditional religion, may feel like there is no place, there is no peers. And for me, that's my encouragement, is like, know that you belong here, that you deserve to be here. And I need to plug in this answer that the counseling center is here, that we work for you. We are to serve you. And one of the initiatives that we're doing at the counseling center is that we have voices groups that are identity-based, and we have other kind of response, identity-based, but also we will work with you. We'll work for accommodations. You deserve to be here. Know the resources. For a lot of students coming from underserved communities and marginalized communities, you may not even know that you could do accommodations, that you may take less credits, that you can get emergency money, that you can get excuse for that class, that you deserve that. So you don't know the resources. So I would say familiarize, keep asking for resources, and know that you deserve. And again, I need to plug in, and CMAC, the Counseling Center, will be there for you. And if we don't do right to you, make us do right to you, because we work for you.
I used to be a peer educator with the Council Mental Health Center, so I can vouch for that sentiment. So last question, and I think both of you have touched on this a little bit, and this will just be to kind of wrap up our panel today. Looking back, is there a specific support system that you wish had been present in your academic life?
Yeah. I wish there was a support group for trans folks for me. I wish there was free counseling and counselors that would understand my identities. I didn't have that at the time, but I had good counselors. I also actually wish things now that I had. I had less impersonal connection and more in-person connection, because I'm 50. I went to college when there was no Facebook or nothing like that. So we were forced to eat food with each other and sit with each other and see each other's tears. So I would want more of that now, more of the in-person, touchy feeling connection.
This, I think, comes from the work I'm doing with raising funds for first-generation students. I would say, for myself, I consider myself a first gen, and seeing the resources now that first gen students have in terms of the programmatic support and the small groups and somebody who you can see on campus and identify and know as a friend and an ally. I wish they had more of that kind of service while I was in school. I just was talking in a conversation with President Fenves last week and with some parents, and talked about how, I powered my way through. I just gutted it out, and I did what I could to get the grades I needed to get to graduate. And to graduate in 4 years. There was not enough money to go any longer than, if anything, I actually graduated a quarter early. I was extra efficient to get done. But if some of the resources that are in place today in terms of supporting those first gen students whose parents couldn't tell you what you should do if you get a bad grade on a paper, or what you should do if you feel like you're being harassed by a roommate. I mean, there's just things that you just don't know. And you might not know it even if you did have a parent who went to college, but I think of the conversations we have with our daughter now, we're actually thinking 2 steps beyond where she even is and saying, okay, and when this thing happens, you should do X. And first and foremost, go and talk to the professor when you get a lousy grade on an exam, and go argue with them. I had friends in college who would argue with the professors, and it was like, what? You go and ask them for, or you tell them, you fight with them about the grade or the number of points you got on your test. And I never got comfortable doing that. I can say my daughter is comfortable doing that. I'm proud of her for that. So I think that might have facilitated probably a few extra points, a few better grades, but definitely just me being empowered to have more control over my education and my happiness while I was there, and my mobility once I graduated.
Well, thank you very much. I think that wraps up our questions for the panel. I learned a lot from the both of you, and I know that I'm sure that a lot of the members of the audience learned a lot as well. And I'm not sure what's next, but thank you very much.